is the bottom of another. The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Run for cover, you discover some will thrive and others suffer. Cause the top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Woo! Don't wait, don't hesitate. Better speak the truth, let it resonate and let it detonate and get blown away till you keep on rising to a higher place. Can't stop, won't stop, don't stop coming till we hit the top. Gotta keep pushing till the day I make it. Since they won't give it to me, then I got to take it. The pain today is power tomorrow. Keep on coming, but you'll never catch me running. Cause I won't bow down. No matter what they say, I wouldn't do it any other way. Keep on coming, but you'll never catch me running. Cause I won't bow down. Top of every mountain is the bottom of another. The top of every mountain is the bottom of another. Not enough to keep us smothered. Lower class, never the upper. Cause the top of every mountain is the bottom of.
Good evening, UN Space Wolf Squad. This is your Wolf Commander Wolf Tank. I am your werewolf. And tonight on the Real Millennials, we are talking about cultural events, cultural current events, cultural and history, cultural and media, cultural and fantasy, whatever. We just want to be culture tonight. Tonight, we also have a special guest tonight, and I'm going to introduce him pretty soon. But let's start with the Hound of the South, Dominic Powell.
Good evening, morning, or afternoon, everyone. This is the Hound of the South, Dominic Powell, and welcome to tonight's episode of the Real Millennials. Where today, we're just going to talk about everything culture, which our favorites, as well as poking fun at every notion of cultural appropriation and multiculturalism.
What he said. We have the humblest of riders. Get that spider off your goddamn. Sorry, Marpacelli.
He tries to cut down the GDs because of a certain other YouTuber who condemns those two words together. Just a context, you authenticator.
I see. Well, this should be interesting, but we will get into that in a minute, I suppose.
Buckle your safety belts, man, because it's gonna be wild tonight. We have the humblest of riders, Humble Marty.
Hello, I'm Humble Marty, and I write things.
We have the Sixth Ranger, Dark Stranger.
Hello.
After all, he's trying to scare off our guests and audience members. He says hello. Anyways, back again. This time tonight. Hopefully, in the future, we're gonna have him more times. Wow, cannot speak right now because I'm hyperactive. The Warrior of Life.
Caffeine is a hell of a drug, I suppose.
Yes, it is. Bumpus Pet 12.
That was kind of a weird laugh you did, Humble. Anyway, greetings to viewers and my fellow Final Fantasy fans. This is Final Fantasy Fan 12, and welcome back to another live stream of the UN Spacey Wolf Squad. And then today, we are back with another episode of The Real Millennials, talking about cultural with the Authenticator as our special guest on this channel.
Negro, that's my...
Oh, God.
I was building
the professionalism ended up in a 10-car pileup, but other than that, everything seems to be going all right.
Don't worry, gentlemen. He just figured out what Chip and Dale's was, so he's happy now.
Oh, my good Lord. Oh, my good Lord.
Got insubordination happening.
Oh, good Lord.
Come on, guys, let our leader finish.
Okay.
I'm powering through this so we can get to talking already. Okay, come on, guys. Be patient with me. We have the lovely Leia Ballet plus size.
Happy late night, everyone. This is Leia Plus Size, your lovely lady of valor, and welcome to the Millennials conversation on culture. I am absolutely sure we're going to cover many different facets of this. So sit back, and I hope you enjoy our show.
And again, our guest tonight is one of a good friend of Dominic's, and also, get this, from another YouTuber, England Teens Crew,
of I Love Comics.
Of I Love Comics, who I guess you just happen to be a guest, right? You're not really just a member.
I don't have a preference one way or the other. We'll see how this goes, I suppose.
Okay. The authenticator.
Hello, everyone. I'm not really sure how to best introduce myself because there's a lot about me that you probably will come to learn if I'm here for very long. I just don't know where to start
Well,
because I'm rather weird, which I am warning you now just so that you're not blindsided by it later. Weirdness is sort of my stock and trade.
I mean, you just said hi.
weirdness is always a good thing. It's always welcome here. It's pretty much our genetic makeup at this point. So
You'll fit in very nicely here. Weirdness is.
it depends. I do have some unwritten rules, which I didn't really discuss in depth in the green room before we started. But if you want to come by every once in a while, I'll discuss them with you afterwards. But yeah. So, Dom, what are we talking about culturally specifically? What we gonna start with? Are we gonna talk about the ill
Well,
appropriation?
well, actually, I want to throw this out to you guys. Would you all like to discuss the day, Mexico's Day of the Dead, or French culture? Which one is the most exciting?
I would love to partake in Diaz. Well, I cannot say that word. I used to be able to.
The Dia
Dios
de
de los
los Muertos.
Muertos.
Thank you. Dia de los
Why are we
Muertos.
discussing that now and not in November when it's actually, the appropriate time to discuss such a thing?
Because it's part of the culture. No.
Yes, you would think we do more Cinco de Mayo. Isn't Cinco de Mayo
Well, yes,
coming
Cinco de
up?
Mayo is coming
Yeah, it's
up.
coming up next month,
I don't
actually.
know what the hell do they do in Cinco de Mayo. We've always done that in our school, in my elementary school back in the days. I would
Yeah, I remember that too. And like everyone.
that goofy ass dance that you hold each other's hand up in the air by the
It's just
fingers.
not an excuse to get drunk and get laid.
In a school?
If I'm not into school, you know what they do in school bathrooms? You see those little holes? They're there for a reason.
That's part of Spanish class, dingus.
To be fair, even before we get to Cinco de Mayo, there's Walpurgis Night in Beltane to be considered.
Oh,
That is true.
Never heard.
For those that don't know, that's the evening before May the 1st and May the 1st, respectively.
That is true. And I vividly remember back in my elementary school days, like everybody celebrated Cinco de Mayo, and it didn't matter that you're not Mexican, Hispanic, or any other type of Latino. Like everybody celebrated, and we actually really learned the history of how it came to be, and also its cultural significance.
Really? They just tried to tell you that like Hanukkah, and then I just didn't give a fuck because it wasn't
Hey,
Halloween or any of that.
It
Hey,
started
I'm
off.
being honest.
I mean, we were given just the basics of Cinco de Mayo until we learn more about it as we get older outside of school.
I don't mean the whole shebang of it. I mean, they try to teach you, and like growing up, a lot of us just didn't give a shit about it because the only ones we needed to know was like Christmas, Halloween, anything you got candy and gifts for.
The fun stuff.
Yeah,
The fun holidays, essentially.
I just remembered it from a Scooby Doo special.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Wait, Scooby Doo did a special about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't remember there being one for Cinco de Mayo. I remember there being one for Day of the Dead. That was the Monster of Mexico one.
Yeah,
But-
that was it.
Yeah, I remember
God
that
bless
one
you.
for Day of the Dead.
Is it Ted? Hey, Evie, glad you could join us.
Not Cinco de Mayo, but Day of the Dead.
there's an
Scooby-Doo
Eevee. We need to catch her. Get the Pokeball quick, Dom.
Get the rocks ready for her too. She's gotta be one of them at some point. She can't stay an Eevee forever.
Yeah,
At least she's not turning into a Vaporeon. Ooh.
Well, shouldn't that also be up to whatever stone she can get her hands on? So I guess we should blame whoever supplies her with whichever stone she needs to evolve into the various
so
EVs.
quick.
Well,
We're 14 minutes in, we get to that so freaking fast.
We're
19.
millennials. Did you
Yeah,
honestly?
yeah.
I mean, it does what it says on the tin. Did you honestly expect it would even take this long?
Power of
But,
friendship, Sylveon.
but to be fair, like both Pokemon and Digimon, well, like they also like showcase like different cultures like in their respective areas as well as celebrating holidays.
Oh yeah,
Yu-Gi-Oh as well was probably a lot of
Yeah.
people's first exposure to Egyptian mythology, although
Mm.
it's loose as can conceivably be because they didn't bother doing the research at all. But oh
Oh,
well.
I know Driftwood would like to contribute to Day of the Dead, but only if the kids are skinny enough.
Although, well, but speaking of Egypt, well, one of their for like, one of the cultures that was like whenever like like anyone does like an Egyptian like type wedding like one of the things that happen is by throwing rice like at the like bride and groom. So, like, that's actually a sign of not only good luck but also of fertility as just like wish them for the best.
Abundance specifically because it's an
Yeah,
agricultural society and rice was their main cereal grain.
correct.
Similar to how the word salary comes from the Roman word, which literally translates as salt money, because salt was a large part of what Roman soldiers were actually paid in.
Hmm.
Oh, so that's where
very
that
true.
comes from.
nice.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of bartering trade and stuff as wealth instead of actual coin and so on.
Hmm.
Yeah. The
See,
word
we-
salary comes from salarium, meaning salt stipend, essentially.
So, see, you learned something new here on the in the Real Millennials.
And of course like this those during like back in our generation, like different works of fiction, we were exposed to like a multitude of different cultures, be it like Egyptian through the likes of Yu-Gi-Oh and the Mummy, or even like the culture of Ireland and Scotland through like the Celtic mythology through well gargoyles of all places.
As far as Egyptian mythology goes, I think the best representation that millennials would be familiar with is probably Tuttenstein, if anybody remembers that.
Yeah,
Ooh, I remember
Because
that
that
one.
actually, bothered to do its homework on occasion, unlike Yu-Gi-Oh, which I love Yu-Gi-Oh to death, but
Yeah,
they
it plays fast and loose
basically
a bit
used
for a
they
card
basically
game.
used pyramids as an aesthetic and nothing the fuck else.
Mm-hmm. And
Well, so
You're not wrong.
the manga did use the weighing of the heart thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is why the millennial scales look the way they look, because they're based on the scales of Anubis and Thoth.
Well, also, like in the manga, like in the Takahashi, like he showcased like different games, and not limited to cards, shown like in the original anime.
My favorite Yu-Gi-Oh reference was when he actually made a travel to Egypt and he talked about how he got suckered by the Egyptian people and it was hard to hate them.
That's
Wow.
true. Oh, and that's a Child of the Flower saying, Mystic Knights also did her first exposure to Celtic mythology.
Hmm.
Well, she's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I say like I still like give my thanks to Gargoyles for not only introducing me to Shakespeare, but also actually getting me to look into the history of Scotland, Ireland, and Celtic mythology. And well, the North.
Gargoyles was interesting in that they tried to square the circle of like Arthurian mythos and Celtic mythology. Although
this-
it probably should be credited most for actually doing fairies at least semi correctly, because the Aoshi or the Tuath Taig, depending on how you want to put it, are a lot closer to Tolkien style elves originally than to like Santa style elves.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which quite often the Arthurian mythos gets lumped in with the Celtic myths that these two are connected with one another.
Well, I mean, you've got Morgan Le Fay obviously literally named after the Celtic goddess of death, aka the Morrigan,
Mm.
and so on. And in some versions of Merlin's origin story, his father is a fae rather than a demon. In the later Christianized retellings of the story, they changed it to be an incubus because we can't give the pagans credit for anything. But in older oral versions of the story, it was a nature spirit, and sometimes even beings like Oberon or Albrecht get thrown in as well.
Ancient days. They really did like their oraling.
Yeah.
Oh
They
my
did
God.
have
Well, it's-
one version where Morgan Le Fay was Merlin's apprentice, and she trapped him in a tree.
Mhm.
There are a lot of versions of that. The only major variant in that story is whether it was Morgana or whether it was Nimue who was the one who trapped him.
Yeah.
And
One of
sometimes he was trapped on a hidden island rather than in a tree.
Or
When
he
I-
was put in a coffin and he still sleeps to this day. Guarded by some witch with an R name. I forget.
Oh, I know who you're talking about, but her name is escaping me as well. Well, since
It was more of
well,
a French thing, but again, with French, so they always add something with women.
Actually, funnily enough, there's a significant argument to be made that the French versions of the mythos are actually older than the British ones, because there exist a lot of parallels between the Arthurian myth cycle and the myth cycle that was attributed to Charlemagne.
Cook.
that's true.
I remember the Magical Legend of the Leprechauns.
You remember the Hallmark Leprechaun and Fairies
It's
miniseries?
that Romeo and Juliet, Troop and
Yeah.
And Randy Quaid.
yeah, Randy Quaid's in it.
I
remember
remember
that.
the horror movie version.
No
Which
relation. to
honestly
the
is
horror
probably
movie
a lot closer
Leprechaun.
to the original mythology than a lot of versions, because again, people don't seem to remember how dangerous the fair folk are. The reason we call them the fair folk is so as to avoid pissing them off.
Yeah, and also like similar to the Jinn. Then like yeah, there's some good phase, there's an evil phase, and neutral phase.
Well, because both the Fae and the Jinn are varying degrees of nature spirits. They aren't good or evil or even both. They are like nature,
Which is
capable of
chaotic.
swinging multiple ways.
Exactly.
Unpredictability.
They sound bipolar.
It pretty much is.
That's nature for you.
Hey.
But I'm just
Okay.
like getting really a good dosage of just knowledge here tonight. I mean, this is really an exciting night for us tonight. So, anything else? Like what else do you know, Authenticator? How deep are you into Norse mythology? Can you educate us on that one?
Well, I guess the best question is, what do you want to know? Where? The question is not what do I know. The question is, where do you want me to start? Because I have a bad tendency of speaking in fluent exposition. Like Anglantine and company frequently chastise me for talking in entire paragraph form.
Oh, don't
So,
worry, we're
like,
used to it with Dom, so you're good.
So yeah, the question is, how long do you have, and how deep down the exposition rabbit hole do you want me to go here?
Usually go 1 to 2 hours. So since I'm off tomorrow, we're probably gonna be a good. It's mostly you guys that I'm more worried about. I can go.
Yeah.
I used to go out.
What does the chat want to know? I suppose is the question. We'll let the chat decide.
If there's a lot of people, there's 3 people in here right now.
Well,
plus,
why don't you... Go ahead, Dom.
Well, plus I actually make sure that I don't like say say anything like in paragraph.
Hmm.
At least now we know who you hung out with to get that habit.
Well, the,
I can't help myself. I've spoken in paragraph form pretty much since I was a kid, so
I'm not,
God
I'm
dang
it's
it,
not
man!
going away anytime
I'm
soon.
not judging you. I'm not judging you. Like everybody have their own way of speaking. I have my own way of speaking. Look, we just poke fun at each other for it.
the only
Exactly.
When I was younger, a lot of people compared me to Double D from Ed and Eddie. So that should give any millennial within earshot an idea of what we're dealing with here.
Child,
And
that's a non-answer. He asked,
that's a
"What?"
non-answer, man.
That is not the answer to the question of "Would you like to know more?"
Because we can go down as many rabbit holes and as deeply as you want. The question
Please,
is
there's
which
children
rabbit
watching.
hole and how deep do we want to go exactly?
I mean, let's start with
Let's start with softcore first, and then we'll work down the ladder.
I don't know.
That's a different kind of rabbit hole, don't you know?
It's
But
all
okay.
one big rabbit hole.
Vivre.
Well,
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, okay. Charles gave us an official answer. I would like to know about Norse mythology.
Okay,
I
but
was going to suggest maybe start with the main gods of Norse mythology and what was their characteristics, what was their types, how did they deal with each other.
okay,
Maybe I can limit it
okay.
to
So
that.
here's I guess an interesting thing. The three different types of deities you usually get in Norse mythology are the Aesir, which is Odin, Thor, and all the most marketable of the deities. Then you've got the Jotnar, which kind of serve a function similar to the Greek Titans in that they're more primordial than the Aesir and also tend to be seen as more unstable. And then there's a sort of middle category, which I guess kind of is semi-cognate to like the Celtic concept of the Fae, which is the Vanir, who are gods of nature that specialize heavily in magic and enchantment, which is where I'm getting they're similar to the Shi and the Tuathaig in that sense, kind of thing.
Okay, well, that's a good start. Well, let's see. You said Odin. Now, did you want to go into his realm or his offspring or those in his throne room, his enemies, his
Okay, again, this to borrow a meme from Batman Beyond. Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down?
I was trying, but I
Yeah,
get what you're saying.
because
You're
a lot
asking
of stuff
him.
happens.
You're supposed to be
Oh.
giving him a specific.
Okay, specific.
Or at least
Okay.
give us a
Let's
starting
go with the
place
fat
that we can spiral out from or something.
Fine to get us started, but you guys keep jumping in excitement.
Sorry, Wolf. Go ahead.
Well, I was doing my best to try to narrow it down, so I'm going to try to think of maybe a certain known story in Norse mythology.
Well, hang on.
Narrow it down for you. It's
He's
simple.
already let off.
Hey, one at a time.
My bad,
What
my bad,
about
my
the
bad.
one where
Never mind.
Odin got his horse?
Oh god,
The
I know that story.
horse that is also his
Adopted nephew,
depending on exactly where you stand with Loki, because Loki and Thor being brothers is largely an invention of Marvel. It is actually Odin and Loki that are blood brothers in Norse mythology, and
Wait,
not in the familial sense, but in the oath sworn sense.
So Odin is basically writing his oath sworn nephew,
Yes.
and Loki lost a bet.
To be fair, Loki usually results in other people losing bets, not himself losing bets. He is very good at staying on the winner's side of the mischief he causes.
That is true. He's a lot more successful at that than Marvel's Loki.
Well,
The question
and
is like which Marvel Loki are you referring to? Comics or movie?
Oh,
Comics.
MCU Loki. MCU Loki, they tried to wooify. It's like,
Well, but and let's be real here. Loki taking on so many negative aspects is probably an affectation of Christian demonization, because in the oldest versions of the story that we have, he was actually a fire deity, and
Yes.
there's some scholarship to suggest that Loki originally served a function of a god of oaths, so a lot of his mischief was originally punishment of oath breakers.
Correct.
Well, I'll just say this.
Kind of makes Loki sound like a djinn.
Yeah.
That you're not too far off, and a lot of like comparative mythology sorts of people have drawn that parallel many times over.
Child of Fire. She says, so Loki isn't a chump in mythology. No, he isn't.
No, and he's not the villain either. It's a similar thing that happened with Loki as happened with Hades in Greek mythology.
And more.
When you actually look into Greek mythology, you realize that both, chronologically, because Hades is the older brother of Zeus, but also in terms of his personality, he's very much the adult in the room, and it's probably best for everyone involved that we put the responsible one in charge of death, because otherwise, I don't know what a world where Zeus was put in charge of the underworld would look like, but given how cavalier he is about the execution of his duties when it comes to everything else, I'm glad the responsible older brother wound up in the death god position. Otherwise, it's zombies all the way down, I'm afraid.
Zeus would be the necromancer with a harem.
Yes, he would be.
Yes, but Hades
oh,
kidnapped
man.
Persephone.
Okay, but actually, funny story about that. In some versions of the story, it was consensual.
Yeah.
Persephone went with Hades willingly, and it was Demeter who failed to cope with the fact that her daughter didn't want to be mommy's little girl anymore. Also, funny story, in some of the oldest versions of the Hades Persephone myth arc that we have, Demeter actually asks Hecate to lead her in search of Persephone, and Hecate, being Hecate, knew the whole time because, well, knowing things and knowing the boundaries of the various worlds is sort of her shtick. But it's heavily implied that she intentionally led Demeter astray so that Hades and Persephone could consummate their marriage without mother-in-law looking over the shoulder.
In other words, I could say pretty much it was like helped out Hades and Persephone.
Yeah, did the Masalad basically.
Yes, because they don't want a helicopter mom in the form of Demeter to watch over their shoulders.
I mean, she according to the myth robbed the entire living world of its fertility because she was pouting over her daughter being quote unquote missing. So
yes,
I'm gonna hazard a guess and say that Demeter's not exactly the most stable of deities. So there's that.
So
Yeah,
you're
I mean, to
telling
be
me
fair,
that
who
Zeus
out of
got
any of the
to do it
gods
correctly.
and goddesses, sorry, Wolf, who out of any of the other gods and goddesses of the pantheon are even stable apart from Hades?
I mean, to be fair, it's mostly the main Olympians that are a childish bag of dicks. Because okay, Hephaestus is fairly stable. Dionysus is unstable, but also extremely charitable and compassionate towards untouchables and the mad and so on. Hecate is, in most older versions of the theogony, she is a titaness, and frankly, quite a lot of the titans and the primordial deities of Greek mythology are actually fairly stand up compared to the Olympians. It was mostly the Olympian narcissism that is responsible for most of the fucked up things we know about Greek mythology. If you actually read Greek mythology,
Yeah, that's fair.
but also let's add in, yeah, like the relationship between Persephone and Hades. Well, her going to him in the underworld, it was consensual. And the same thing happened to Canis, Karen is like when she met Poseidon, like what happened between the two of them was consensual, and when he asked her like what is her wish and desire, like she wants to transform like into a man like with invulnerability and other supernatural capabilities, and he granted her wish.
Although, lest we forget Poseidon also being responsible for Medusa, because the aforementioned the Olympians are a bag of dicks sometimes.
Yes.
That would
That
exist.
was a Roman that rewrote that story.
See, I'm not entirely sure on that one, because for example, let's take Kronos as an example. The Roman equivalent of Kronos is Saturn, and the Romans were a lot more sympathetic to Saturn than the Greeks were to Kronos. So I'm wondering if we can blame the Romans for some of this stuff, or if it's the Greeks themselves that were being somewhat petty to their deities here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say like briefly to touch back on Canis. Because like once you and when she like went on her male identity as Canius, like she does like transform back into her original form like when she shapeshifted into that of a majestic multicolored bird.
Well, if I may interject, since we're talking about cultures and stuff, I think that's an interesting topic to touch on. You mentioned how the Greeks were interpreting like their deities in a petty manner. Well,
Yeah.
how about that? Like, let's talk about the ancient religions and the culture. Like, how did that like interpretation really reflect the culture of those times? I mean, you say the Greeks were doing it in a petty manner. What about you go to the Egyptians with theirs, or the Romans with theirs, or even the Mesopotamians, who usually get kind of left out in a lot of the time with theirs.
This is also true, but you also have to keep in mind that the moral systems of the day, like the things that the people in these cultures would have considered moral and immoral, are different than ours. Like like, and this is true of a lot of ancient polytheistic cultures. We in modern society seem to place a lot less weight on the concept of the given word or the taken oath, but to most European polytheistic cultures, being an oathbreaker was probably the single worst thing you could be called, and that's why there were so many gods of the various pantheons who specifically punished oath breakers.
Mm-hmm.
Such as Loki.
Yeah.
Such as Loki. Zeus takes on an oath breaker punishment aspect. Hecate, of course, is the quintessential scary bitch of do not make a deal with her and break it. You will the things that will occur to you are probably not even worth writing about, because we'd rather not remember them.
I thought Nyx was the scarier one, because I remember the story where one of the children of Nyx pissed off Zeus so much he was going after one of them. It's the sons. I think it was Hypnos, or was it? I think it was Hypnos. And then right when he was about to get killed, Nyx comes up and says, "Don't you ever go near my son." And Zeus is
No,
like,
he fled
"Okay."
to her abode for safety, and Zeus didn't want to trespass on her because he was frightened of
To be
incurring her
fair,
wrath.
Nyx and Hecate both have the quasi-primordial leverage over Zeus, and that's why he was frequently scared of both of them in the myth. Which, I mean, to be
Wasn't Nyx
fair,
an actual primordial?
as the old saying goes, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned."
What
Well,
was the question, Dark? Hang on. What was your
It
question, Dark?
wasn't Nyx. I know Hecate like it's ambiguous, but I recall Nyx is one of the actual listed primordials, along with Kronos, the time god, Sky, and
Uranus.
Uranus
Gaia.
is Uranus is the god of the sky. Gaia is the goddess of an embodiment of the earth.
Yeah.
And Nyx was the night eternal.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Titans all came from Uranus and Gaia.
Yep.
To the
Yes.
point that one of their sons lopped off Uranus's appendage so
Which was
that it couldn't
Kronos.
make any more.
Yes, that was Kronos.
Who also gave birth to Venus. I mean Aphrodite,
Yeah.
because from the sliced off genitalia that made foam, and from the foam came Aphrodite.
Yeah.
From
Speaking
Venus.
of
From the
speaking
sea
of
foam in
gods
particular.
that speaking of gods that have a darker aspect to them that doesn't get paid attention to very much, Aphrodite got up to some pretty heinous shit, folks.
Oh
A lot of
yes.
heinous
Oh,
shit.
yeah.
So much.
Ooh, yeah.
She is, to use the modern parlance, the ultimate thought goddess.
She was her name is Pride of love and lust, and that's what she was. She had
Which means that if she decides that you're worth her time and you reject her, well, gynocentrism is a hell of a drug. Lol.
Yeah. And she's also, much like Demeter, she's kind of a bit of an overbearing mother, as she is towards her own son.
Yes.
And not to mention a cheating bitch. Aphrodite
Yeah.
cheated a lot in the myth.
Yeah.
And hates tomboys, obviously.
Was her son Psyche, or was it? I can't.
No,
think of the,
Eros was her son. Psyche
Eros.
was the woman that
he fell in love with.
Yeah, Psyche was the woman that Eros fell in love with.
Because
and then was later deified with Ambrosia.
yes, but I know before that, Aphrodite or Venus, whichever culture, treated her rather unfairly for a while until she relented.
And she also had the other son, Hermaphro, who, as we know,
is the basis of the word hermaphrodite, because
after he got fused with the nymph Deity.
Yeah.
Yes, that's how.
Which is really much of a horrifying creation when you think about it.
Yes.
And it was all caused because of one woman's blind lust and never wanting to be separate from her ideal man, who didn't want her to begin with.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the Greeks seem to have a cultural motif against obsession and like fanaticism in general. A lot of their stories feature everything gets fucked up because somebody gets overly obsessed with something, and then negative repercussions ensue.
Key point: the Minotaur.
I was just about to bring that up, Dark. I don't know.
I was just thinking it sounds more like the story of Echo and Narcissus, if I'm saying his name right.
Yes, Narcissus.
Yes.
Well, that's where we got that name from, but it's another name that sounds pretty closely to that.
Yes.
I mean, the Minotaur is in the category of, if we focused on Zeus's various horn dog escapades, this would turn into a episode of mythological Jerry Springer pretty quickly, because he could not keep it in his toga.
Well, that
under any
wasn't him.
circumstances.
That wasn't him. It was the Crete. No, not Crete.
There was a bull. There was. I didn't mean it, Dark, but yeah, it was a king, and I can't think of his name.
Minos, the king of
Minos.
Crete. He was supposed to sacrifice the greatest of the Cretan bulls to Zeus, but he kept it for himself, and so Zeus went, okay, click. Now your daughter is going to bang that bull you tried to keep from me, and
his wife. He put a spell, the spell on his wife to do exactly what you just said.
Yeah, and
then
his wife went yiffing.
Hold on, guys.
Oh, sorry.
We're arriving at the end. Let's all get there together, but we cannot talk at the same time.
My bad.
Please.
Go on. Sorry.
He's on a roll. Let him cook.
Okay.
No, I was just telling him it was his wife, not his daughter. But continue,
It's like
please.
I think there are multiple versions of that myth though, because I'm almost certain there are ones in which Minos was considered the grandfather of the Minotaur, and that would
As one would say, history is myth and lies agreed upon. I mean, it's tried and true.
well, and it's especially funny when you consider that the historical basis for Plato's Atlantis was a sister island to the Cretians, which modern day scholars refer to as the Minoans. I personally advocate that we should just call them what they probably were obviously called to begin with, which is the Atlanteans. Because if you actually read Plato's description of Atlantis as he was told about it, and then you look at the archaeological record of the Minoan civilization, they're fucking identical. We discovered the real world equivalent of Atlantis. It's not as over the top and sci-fi as a lot of people would prefer Atlantis be. Which most of the more over the top aspects of Atlantis mythology doesn't actually come from Plato. It comes from Edgar Cayce, otherwise known as the Sleeping Prophet, who had visions of it in the late 19th and early 20th century. Like all the like Atlantean crystal technology stuff, that's from Edgar Cayce. It's not from Plato. But as for Plato's description of Atlantis, it maps on pretty closely 1-to-1 with what modern day scholars are referring to as the Minoan civilization, which is why I advocate that we should just stop calling them the Minoans and call them the Atlanteans, because that's what they were, probably. Anyway, sorry, tangent.
You're fine.
That's okay.
Just like we should stop calling the Africans Africans and just call them the Nubians again. It's a much cooler name.
Nubian sounds sexy, anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hades has been.
Go ahead and read it aloud, Humble. You need to have a time to shine.
Hades has been given a better PR in recent years. I think Disney is the only place where they tried to villainize him and it backfired.
You know what show actually made me think twice about Hades on that aspect? Hercules, The Legendary Journeys of all shows.
Yeah.
That's where I discovered that Hades is actually not a bad dude.
No, he's not. I'm glad that we're getting a lot of positive PR for Hades, because for the last 40 years there was a lot of demonizing of Hades because, well, he's the ruler of the underworld. That means he has to be the devil because we say so. But again, no, if anything, he's probably the most mature of his siblings.
My favorite part of Hades is he named his dog Spot.
Yes, Kerberos. Yeah, Cerberus comes from Kerberos, which means the spotted one.
I think he gets this reputation of being evil because in Hades, many people were tortured. Sisyphus, excuse me. Sisyphus.
Sisyphus.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the thing about Tartarus is you have to keep in mind that Tartarus is specifically for people who either were the Titans, who obviously betrayed the Olympians, or the people like Sisyphus who explicitly betrayed the gods, and in particular Hades' trust. Because if you actually look at most of the myths in which Hades is referenced, which there aren't too many of because most people don't like talking about... Back then, most people didn't like talking about the god of death because, well, he's the god of death. But point being, most of the surviving stories of Hades have some person going to Hades to either retrieve their loved one or some other such thing, and Hades actually feels compassionate enough for them that he gives them the chance to win their freedom, and either through accident, as is the case with Orpheus, or through deliberate treachery, as was the case with Sisyphus, they screw him over, and then and only then do they wind up in Tartarus, because you do not fuck with a deity, ladies and gentlemen. Especially not when they're trying to be compassionate towards you. That is probably the ancient Greek equivalent of fuck around and find out. Hades was trying to do you a solid, and you screwed him over, and now, well, this is what happens.
Yeah.
Karma's a
lay
bitch.
on some defense of the mortals on this aspect. I'm give them some leeway on this one. You gotta keep in mind as well that the fact that the gods, the Olympians, routinely fucked them over in so many stories and rumors spread around across the
Yeah, but not Hades is the thing.
That's what I'm
Because of
saying.
the
Like,
aforementioned, he's the adult in the room thing.
it would. I'm just saying, it's like I wouldn't blame them for also assuming Hades would go back on a deal, much like the gods would. Much like
I can understand the rationale there, but in cases like Sisyphus's, he explicitly tried to be treacherous and tried to convince Hades that he was mistreated in his burial practices, so that he could go off and chastise his wife. And it's stated in pretty much every version of Sisyphus' story that we have that he intentionally tried to be treacherous to Hades and had absolutely no intention of ever coming back to the realm of the dead. So
Sisyphus can go fuck off. No, I'm mostly speaking on Orpheus and many other mortals that might have assumed that Hades might go back on his deal because legends and rumors spread across the land of Greece about how the gods mistreat the mortals. So it's like, you've been burned so many times. That's your
yeah. I mean, given what Zeus and Poseidon get up to, I suppose a certain degree of mistrust of your deities is warranted. But all I'm saying is, in the surviving stories we have of him, in their closest to original format that we have, Hades does not ever do what Zeus and Poseidon do. He doesn't spite people. He's not vindictive. He's mostly, in most of the oldest versions of the stories we have, just a neutral arbiter of death. He's a guy, he got assigned to do a job, he's doing the job. And like I say, given how fundamental of a force death is and the underworld is in Greek myth, it is noteworthy that most of the stories that do survive of Hades are stories of him being moved to compassion by people's plight and being willing to give them a chance to make good on themselves. And just as often as fate conspires against the people who wind up being tested in this way, you also get cases like Sisyphus where people explicitly try to fuck him over, and only after he has explicitly been fucked over, after trying to be compassionate to some people, does Hades go, well, I gave you a shot and you abused it, so push the older fuck.
Well, it's like Wolf said, for the Hercules TV show, we get a I guess we'll call this a better portrayal of Hades and the romance of him and Persephone, because it does seem like
something else after this.
It does seem like in that episode, it's going more of that she doesn't feel like she's being forced into relationship with him. She truly loves him.
Mm-hmm.
To cap off on this, I did not like the portrayal of Persephone and Percy Jackson in the movie.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of that one either.
Percy Jackson as a franchise is not my favorite at all. I get that. Frankly, some of the things that tick me off about Percy Jackson are just world building quibbles I have. Like, I understand the impulse to turn demigods into neurodivergent people because we want to make the reader able to empathize with our characters and stuff. But they fudged demigod status so hard to make that shit fit, and I've never liked that.
Okay,
personally,
you gotta explain the
I like
demigods
the
now.
Clash of the Titans version better.
Which one, the original or the remake?
The original one, the Class of the Titans.
Clash.
I think she's talking about the cartoon.
The cartoon.
Talk about the animated series.
Because they turned Narcissus into an himbo airhead. And the only thing that was his superpower was being super lucky.
Well, and that's the thing, and what I was getting at with the Percy Jackson trying their damnedest to make demigod misfits work. In the mythology, the thing that makes demigods not be able to fit in with normal humans is they're just too strong. They are literally,
Man.
semi divine beings who are trapped in a human shell. Like, for example, Hercules, a lot of his early life is denoted by he is so much stronger than everyone else that he accidentally ends up hurting people without meaning to. And I feel like you could have played into that aspect of demigod misfit syndrome and not needed to throw in all this. Well, this is why a bunch of demigods are nerds, even though they should be Giga Chads basically out of the bottle.
I couldn't really ever get into the whole Giga Chad out of a bottle thing.
Well, but you see what I mean? Like, what's his name? The guy who wrote Percy Jackson. He tried to justify
Jordan
why.
Reardon.
Yeah, thank you. Reardon tried to justify why demigods weren't as hyper capable or hyper competent as they should realistically have been by making them various degrees of ADD or autistic analogies. And I get why, for the sake of marketability, because we have to make our protagonist relatable. But I feel like, honestly, you could have done the demigods are too strong to be around normal people thing, and that could have been enough of a sympathetic backstory for them. You didn't need to throw in their autistic or their ADD aspects that Reardon did.
Which
I agree. Heck, kids would even abuse. If kids were given godly powers, they would have abused him, kind of like Zeus abused his.
Well, and that's another interesting thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you do have the occasional villainous demigod, like I believe his name is Luke, in the Percy Jackson series. But especially given how the Olympians got up to quite a lot of dysfunctional shenanigans, realistically, there should probably be a higher ratio of show-off dickheads to good kids in Camp Half-Blood there.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Realistically, yeah.
And thinking about this now that you mention it with like the whole demigods, that the reason why they don't fit in amongst humans is because they're like way too powerful. Some stuff like that. It's just like, actually, it sounds like a pretty good analogy to the X-Men. No wonder why everyone hates the mutants.
Yeah, and honestly, I always like there are a lot of flaws with the Fox X-Men movies, but the one thing I did like, and the way they justified the hatred of mutants with humans can sort of instinctively tell that the mutants are the next step in human evolution, and they feel usurped by it. That made sense to me. Like, obviously, in the original comic book context, because it was the '60s and everything was quasi-atomic, the X-Men were the children of the atom. But in the Fox X-Men movies, having mutation just be a thing that naturally happens after a certain length of time, honestly, that always made more sense to me than the whole children of the atoms thing.
But I do kind of digress,
that was later. Well, that was later explained, like in universe, that the whole children of the atom aspect was the atom merely held birth, for the next generation of mutants, which activated their X gene. But the X gene itself, it's been a natural part of humanity for millennia, not really centuries.
Yeah, for reasons we would take too long to explain, because that goes way back in the universe of Marvel. But I digress.
Well, the point being is look, there are some works of fiction that actually handles the pantheons as well as the minors with tact and respect, and others, in other words, don't be it'll be like the Percy Jackson series and anything else.
Yeah,
What's y'all take on cultural appropriation?
it sucks.
Yeah, it's both. It's both.
I
Because
Rather, it
my
just sounds
take on it is
flimsy.
Wait, guys.
slightly more nuanced because I do think it's fair to say that if you're referencing shit from another culture, you should do your research. Like you should develop
Mhm.
some level of competency and expertise with it. But realistically, everything that has ever like had a larger impact on humanity is because someone in a separate culture looked at something from another culture and went, "That is cool. I'm using that."
Pretty
And
much.
so much of the greatest aspects of human civilization are the result of various cultures going, "That is cool. I am using that." Um,
mm-hmm.
case in point, there would have been no European Renaissance without Alexandria at its peak, and Alexandria was quite well known for taking various things from different cultures and having them commingle and cohabitate. Um, like in Alexandria, it wasn't uncommon to see a temple to Athena or Aphrodite on one corner and a temple to Isis or Brigid on the other. And I think it is worth noting that pluralism, as distinct from multiculturalism, is based and correct. And we wouldn't be where we are now without pluralism. Multiculturalism, on the other hand, and by proxy also the idea of cultural appropriation as social justice academia would refer to it, is bullshit and actively counterproductive and destroys everything it touches. Because all it does is create distrust between groups. And I can't be the only millennial to have noticed this, but shit was better in the 90s specifically because we accepted the notion of you could use concepts or folklore or mythology from other cultures, and as long as you did it because you thought it was cool or because you thought it was an interesting story concept, good things could result from it. But in today's hypersensitive cultural appropriation fueled bullshit, oh no, you can't talk about Native American mythology because you're not a Native American. You can't talk about voodoo because you're not black, etc., and so on. And all it's done is retard our capacity for understanding each other and our capacity for being charitable to each other.
Harrison
That's one
Bergeron.
centralization
Bring up
like, of
that
the
you really
generations.
you were saying something, Doc? I'm sorry.
No, it was Dom that was talking.
In other words, the infantilization of our generation. And trust me, Authenticator, you're not the only one like who shares his sentiments. You know, that things were better in the 90s, and everyone across the generations agreed on this.
Well, I'm pretty sure on a show called The Real Millennials, the sentiment "things were better when we were kids in the '90s and early 2000s" is not an uncommon sentiment.
I want to go deeper into what you said just now with the whole you can't do this unless you are born of that race, or you can't do that because you didn't study properly. But I want to tackle that real quick, unpack as you would say. This notion of you have to stifle somebody into a bubble just because they're say white and want to work on a project that centers around Native American culture, right? Or say, for instance, this person is Latina, but she's well studied in, say, Norse mythology. You mean to tell me she can't write Norse mythology because she's not Norwegian? Or
yeah, and what kills me is the SJW types, for lack of a better word, will simultaneously decry cultural appropriation while also decrying the concept of what's known as folkism, which is the idea that only people of certain genetic or cultural backgrounds can work with different spiritual systems. And I can't for the life of me understand how you can simultaneously decry folkism for being racist nonsense and not understand how being hypersensitive about cultural appropriation is also racist nonsense. Like I said, I have a standard of quality or a standard of expertise that I would determine these things by. As in, as long as you're making a good faith effort to understand a culture that is not your own and you're not just borrowing it for the sake of aesthetics, I don't see any problem with that. But if you're so hypersensitive about cultural appropriation that you can't countenance the idea of cultural appreciation, then you are fucked in the head.
In other
Indeed.
words, yep, I agree 100%. In other words, this culture, if I'm white and I want to take over and write the Black Panther comic, I'll be banned because I am white. That's the way they
Which is
think
Indeed,
pretty
now.
funny
foreboding.
because
Yes,
it was made.
Something
Black
else.
Panther was made by 2 white guys.
exactly. And they
Something
seem to
else that-
forget
that,
that.
that also throws people on the loop, throws me on the loop all the time. So here's another kicker, right? They borrow white people from writing minorities, from minority type of storytelling, right? Folklore, what have you, right?
Mhm.
They have absolutely no problem with minorities writing white stories and butchering them, or any white mythology and butchering that by throwing in some, say, minorities in a mythology that shouldn't exist.
Let alone they will let minorities butcher their own mythology because a lot of these SJW types don't believe in the concept of meritocracy or don't believe in the concept of meaningful expertise. And so I shouldn't have to be accurate to this mythology that I'm shamelessly using for brownie points. I should just be able to do it because I'm the right skin color, don't you know?
I
Correct.
have conjecture to believe that most of these social justice warriors either think they're doing a good thing or they honestly think the people that they're supporting aren't that intelligent.
I tend to lean more in the first direction because I always operate by the assumption that someone can be sincere and also wrong, so they can sincerely believe a wrong thing and then act in accordance with that wrong thing. That doesn't mean that their end result isn't harmful or shouldn't be pushed back against, but I do think there's a tendency for some people to see malice where there is simply incompetence, and sincerely held wrong beliefs explain a lot more than someone being deliberately malicious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
The
heck.
old Hamlin's Razor, never attribute to malice what can adequately be explained by incompetence. And my word to social justice become a lot more intelligible when you realize that it's incompetence all the way down for the most
Oh,
part.
Yeah.
heck, it's actually led to lawsuits.
She's mentioning the
Oh, yeah.
Cleopatra special.
Oh God.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
That's like the tip of the iceberg. There's
Yes.
also been, I think,
Well, let's
The
not
Black
forget the woman
Samurai.
yes, and
Yasuke
yes,
and Japan
yes.
basically going, wait, shouldn't a game set in Japan's history be about Japanese culture, just like all the
My-
other Assassin's Creed games?
My
That's basically supposed to at
favorite
least be a DLC
response
story.
to it was when they decided to do a Japanese. They did a shovelware version of that was just called the Black Samurai, and it's basically got the same gameplay as Oblivion.
I would have,
Mhm.
I would have done if I was running production of Assassin's Creed Shadows. First of all, I would have made it all about ninjas assassinating the shogunate.
Well,
Second, I would have
they're not Shinobi.
that's whatever, man. What I'm saying is, next I would have a DLC where you have one of those where you play a ninja character and you assassinate Yasuke too.
It's
As a
funny.
samurai.
It's funny to me that Japanese history is so like well suited to the Assassin's Creed Templars versus Assassins thing, because as you just pointed out, it should have been as simple as ninjas are the assassins, samurais and other like Japanese military fixtures are the equivalent of the Templars, and off we go. But
Yeah.
instead of actually showing Japanese culture the same deference we've shown to every other culture and historical era in Assassin's Creed franchise history, we have to use Japanese culture as a vehicle to lecture people about social justice for the checks notes 10,000th
They've been
time
doing
this
that
month.
for quite some time now. They've been with the Japanese really bad. I don't
Because Japanese culture is so heavily focused on meritocracy and competence, and according to the neo-Hegelian bullshit that is social justice, competence and meritocracy are whiteness, and therefore Japanese culture is basically honorary white, as and when we feel like it.
The dumbest one was when they had a Wikipedia author and someone who was basically a fujoshi, which was male on male action shipper, be their historical experts. And then they had another doctor who wasn't a history doctor try to defend this claim, saying he was a gay communist black guy. And then
Well, and here's the sad thing about Yasuke. Yes, there was a historical figure on whom Yasuke is based, but Yasuke, as the social justice warriors are aware of the concept, basically comes from one guy who was explicitly writing fiction when he wrote it. But
Yeah.
because it fits into the neo-Hegelian quasi-critical theory bullshit that is social justice, we will take that revisionist history that was explicitly fiction when it was written and run with it all the way to the end zone, because why not?
Yeah, at the same
they
time,
love to check,
but, like,
check
we
all
don't.
kinds of mythology.
yeah, they got and then they got dogpiled on the 50-yard field line.
And they complain
Because,
about
surprise, surprise, when you make a central axiom of your ideology, meritocracy is a harmful childish delusion that we have to deprogram people from, a lot of people are like, what the fuck are you on? When they hear that.
Well,
I've been
first,
saying that for years.
well, say like on the one, well, first off, let's just showcase like how harmful of a legacy the Frankfurt School and postmodernism has left to like in the West. And second, as for Yasuke himself, yeah, he is a real historical figure. But as for his status as a samurai, like to this day, like we don't know, because all available like history and documentation surrounding him has been unfortunately lost in the sands of time.
Here's another
And
question I
even like
propose that I know they wouldn't do. Here's another question I propose. Why couldn't we have a Ninja Gaiden style game starring Yasuke?
We kind of already have that. It's called Sengoku Basara.
We can have more.
Well, but here's the thing. No matter what idea you give to social justice to try and make something good out of, they cannot. They cannot, because they explicitly consider any like intersubjective or objective standard of goodness or quality to be a delusion that they must politically and morally fight against. And I'm sorry, but when one of your foundational premises is everything that people consider to be good is just some cultural delusion that they bought into without realizing it, nothing you do will therefore be good, because if you explicitly make beauty standards, for example, your enemy, and go out of your way to do everything the opposite of them, or writing standards as your enemy and make everything the opposite of them, no matter how good of a premise you work with, you will fuck it up, because fucking it up is a like moral goal in neo-Hegelianism.
Oh my
David
gosh!
David A.R. White, I hope you're paying
that
attention.
mirrors the Snow White remake perfectly.
Oh yeah.
Not just Snow White. I also bring this up with David A.R. White. He's the guy who is responsible for Pureflix, the same people that made the God's Not Dead movies. I hope you're taking notes on that, because that's why your movies suck.
Well, that is down to moralistic authoritarianism regardless. No matter how pure and sacrosanct you think your moral and religious and spiritual system is, if you are relying on the moral worth of something to compensate for a lack of qualitative and artistic worth of something, you're going to just make yourself look bad. Because here's the thing, moral worth and aesthetic or qualitative worth are two entirely different categories. Yes, you can overlap them, but you need to put meritocracy. You need to make something that's good on its own merits first, and whatever thematic or political or moral rigmarole you tack on afterwards is supplementary at best. You cannot substitute moral goodness for qualitative goodness. They are different categories, and you need to not make the category error.
You know, I've said this so many times. I do kind of wish we could go back to that where we used to make fun of Christians. The crazy ones.
I mean, there are still people who are worth making fun of in that vein. For example, anyone remember Matt Walsh going anime is satanic, lol?
Yes.
Yeah, don't even get started on that.
Or the famous Gavin McGinnis build the table instead of playing video games dads bit from the Rebel. There are still the old school like authoritarian family values traditionalist types out there. Fortunately, they have very little power and get mocked every time they do show up, which is good. But frankly, I'm of the opinion that nobody should be moralistically authoritarian in that way. I don't like social justice, and I don't like the family values traditionalism. My standard is focus on in-universe logic, in-universe world building, in-universe quality of characters, and so on. And whatever moral or thematic rigmarole you want to tack on or try to tack on in the background there, that's fine. But, and this goes to like art school in general, we need to remind these people that themes and politics and morality are all well and good if you can manage them, but they are not the point of art. The point of art is to be good first, in the qualitative sense, not the moral and political sense. And so much of what is wrong with art today is people think that themes and politics and morality are the only things about art that matter. They only see art as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. And that's why so many of the franchises we grew up with still hold up well into our adulthood, looking at you, DC Animated Universe, looking at you, Gargoyles, etc. But everything these people make ultimately ends up being shit regardless, because they put moral worth over artistic worth and wound up getting neither.
And that has been his TED Talk.
They also tend to age like spoiled milk.
Yeah,
well, yeah,
and that also comes to show you why you also need to be objective with your judgment, at least.
Yeah, you may believe wholeheartedly in your ideology, but you have to remember that at the very least you should be trying to convince people who aren't your ideology yet to check out your ideology, which means you need to have your finger on the pulse of what do people outside of my ideological bubble think.
Yeah,
and if you can't manage that, as Adam Savage used to say, well, there's your problem.
Yeah, and it's the whole reason why that a lot of stuff that, and I say that you need to be objective with this because, especially with art, and speaking as an aspiring storyteller myself, that it takes a shit ton of time. And I am not kidding when I say this. It takes a lot of time that you need to develop some skills with this. That's why you need to develop your craft with this. And it's very crucial with this. You also need to learn of different mediums, whether it's you're making with movies. If you want to shoot a movie, you could shoot a movie, although you need some writing to get to that point. But if you want to draw out your story or paint it, then just go ahead and do that. But if you want to be a writer, you gotta take the time to learn how to write.
Well, and here's another like fallacy of modern day art schools that we need to nip in the bud if we ever want to see good things being produced again, which is, yes, art is subjective, but art is subjective to a point only. There are objective and intersubjective standards that are basically all but non-negotiable. And if you want to sand against the grain, you can sometimes manage to sand against the grain if you're very good at everything else. But here's the thing. If you can't provide the basic bitch like standards of quality to begin with, if you can't give people what they want, in other words, you can't do what should be the next level of that, which is subvert expectations. If you can't provide people what they want to begin with, you can't provide them something other than what they want or something more than what they want. This is the problem with art that does actually kind of grow out of our era that we love so much, even though so many of the things we grew up on were so good. People like Alan Moore, people like Neil Gaiman, people like, I'm very familiar with comic books, so the British Invasion is what first popped in my head. But people like Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore seem to have drawn the conclusion from their success that their personal ego is what made their art special. And that is not the case. What made Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman and other, assorted creatives in our era as successful as they were was essentially they succeeded due to their innate talents and more so in spite of rather than because of their ego. But because they met with such unilateral success with things like The Sandman and things like V for Vendetta and so on, they got it in their heads that I, the storyteller, am what makes this story good or worthwhile. And that artistic ego tripping led to the infiltration of the social justice warrior types.
If I may, right quick, if that's all right.
I was about to ping you in anyways. Go ahead, Dark.
Oh, thank you. You mentioned, having your finger on the pulse and putting out something that appeals to people, readers and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's this one problem we're kind of facing now where a lot of the readers aren't newer readers. They're already, veteran comic readers and stuff. But when it comes to like newer readers and newer generations, as we're seeing the techno zombies, as I call them, they're very apathetic and disinterested. How do you, in your opinion, create any kind of art outside of just MOBAs and whatever to appeal to these generations, these demographics?
Well,
the first showcasing different cultures.
The first thing I would say is it's an unpopular opinion in Hollywood and everywhere else in this day and age. But if you want to know what your audience wants, you should ask them first and actually listen to what they tell you instead of recontextualizing and revisionist historying it.
Yeah, that's the problem, though. A lot of these newer generations and stuff, if you've actually talked with them, I've talked with a shitload of them, and mostly you try to get to the hard question, they just go shrug or, I don't know, I don't care, I don't think about that.
I will defend them up to a point because we grew up in an era that was a peak of creativity. Like, we all grew up on so many great franchises that made us lifelong fans of geek shit and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The Zoomers and
got us into history and learning about the cultures.
The Zoomers and the Gen Alpha types grew up in an era where every pre-established IP was being institutionally captured by the SJW types. And the SJW types made it their personal mission to deprogram any sense of quality. So I can see why the Zoomers and the Gen Alphas are demoralized, because we have positive memories of the good old days to look back on. They never had any good old days because, as far as they're concerned, these IPs have always been horribly mismanaged, and that's all the exposure they've gotten to these IPs. As for creating new shit, the only thing that's more demonized in today's day and age, the only thing that's more demonized than being a fan of pre-established IP is wanting to create something of your own making. And so I can see why, just by cultural osmosis after a fashion, a lot of the Zoomers and the Gen Alphas have gone, oh, well, I guess these IPs were always kind of shit, and the older generations were just delusional, or oh, I guess there's no point in creating anything new. Personally, I think we need to engage in some remoralization for the Zoomers and the Gen Alphas to show them how, give them examples of good stuff that they can hold to their hearts and be like, yes, this is a good thing. This is a thing that wants to make me aspire to create
Bring
my
that
own
up.
shit or
I
add to the
yeah,
legacy and so on.
yeah. You bring that up. I actually have been talking to a coworker's son who's kind of a Zoomer too. He's a bit of an anime head. So what I try to do is introduce him to older anime or even anime of the 2000s, which look a bit more newer than classic anime. So I try my best to pitch them each one. So lately, I the last time we talked, I pitched them the two Vampire to D OVAs and Redline and Sword of the Stranger and
May I make a suggestion? Try
please.
getting him into some of the Western action comics that are very similar to anime. Because as much as I and many millennials, I'm sure, love anime, given that we were the tsunami generation after all. As much as I love all those things, I don't want to cede that much ground to the Japanese. I love Japan. I'm an otaku and I'm a weeb and all that business. But and related to what I was just talking about, we need to show these kids. We need to be the older brothers or the parents or the whatever to show them that there was a time where Western entertainment was not only taking influence from anime like Glen Origami's Teen Titans and so on, but could stand toe to toe with anime in terms of its writing complexity, its characters, its aesthetics, and so on. Like the DC animated universe, the X-Men the animated series, Gargoyles, etc. There are so many. Our era was in many ways the era of the very serious action cartoon, and I want to incentivize the Zoomers and the Gen Alpha types to watch the old, classics of our generation so that they can see you can do what the anime does, but you can do it with Western IPs and with Western standards. It can be done.
Yeah.
I mean, heck,
Look at-
Personally, I would rather
heck, like,
just
very
have
good
a
example.
enrichment of Western culture and animation and stuff instead of just relying on the anime aesthetic. Because we used to have pure Western good animation. I mean,
Mhm.
yes,
Oh, yeah.
it's gone sour, but Disney, some offshoots that came
Nickelodeon,
out of Disney, Don
Disney Channel.
Bluth,
Don Bluth, yeah.
Yeah.
great works.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
heck,
how-
a good example like of works that were inspired by Eastern storytelling, like Antarctic Press. Well, they've been going on like since the 80s. And he's like and like the head of the publisher, Ben Dunn, similar to Joe Mad, he was able to synthesize Eastern and Western storytelling together while still remind people that this was made over here in the West and not in Japan. And his long-running titles like range from Ninja High School and Gold Digger.
And it's not like the West can't do quasi anime. Like Avatar: The Last Airbender is probably the quintessential example.
Yeah.
The less said about Korra, the better, because Korra was shit. But that's neither here nor there.
But I do like to make one rather cool example when it comes to animation. I actually watched this video where it's a whole compilation of specific episodes of animated shows or some animated films that do that motorcycle slide that was borrowed from Akira, the animated movie, where all of them do the exact same motorcycle slide. Like there was one episode of Batman the Animated Series where Robin does exactly that, which it is pretty cool.
Or just recently with Shadow from Sonic the Hedgehog 3.
And on the cultural topic, I think it's worth noting that some of what made the 90s and early 2000s such an amazing era to grow up in is our exposure to so many different cultures. We are the Toonami generation, we are the Western action cartoon generation, and so on. And so many of the great IPs that were established in our childhoods did take nods from European folklore or Japanese anime or Hong Kong cinema or on and on the list goes. And I think the long and short of it is we need to reject multiculturalism and re-embrace pluralism again.
Mm-hmm.
And if we piss off the SJWs in so doing, so much the better, because they deserve to be pissed off.
Yeah,
they
but
deserve
just
to be
ignore the
ignored.
screaming. Yeah, just
I mean,
ignore the screaming.
I'm more in touch with like ignoring them because I don't really think their ideas are really good.
I don't know. I think mockery and Schadenfreude are much more effective tools for banishing them back to the shadows from whence they came than just ignoring them.
Oh, there's a whole industry on that.
Yeah,
bunch of Republican comedians and stuff.
Well, and the other thing is, I think those of us that are on the left, and I am more politically left wing, probably than most anti-SJWs. I think the left needs to get back in touch with its libertarian and populist aspects, because I think that's the main difference between where and when we grew up and where and when we are now, which is back in our day, we were just coming off of the Satanic Panic and the Red Scare and the Hays Code and the Comics Code Authority and so on. So the right wing was the moralistic authoritarian wing, and the left wing naturally, therefore, became the punk movement, the goth movement, the anti-establishment artists, and so on. But because they won so succinctly in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of the left forgot that what won them the day was not being left wing; it was being populist, libertarian, and anti-moralistic.
What did you say, Dark? Hang on.
You also forgot the video game. I forget what that was mostly labeled, because mostly they labeled
the Jack
it with
Thompson scenario. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The school shootings after the Columbine thing, but
the Jack Thompson movement.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I was saying, large sums of the left wing that won the day in the 90s and early 2000s became exactly as moralistic, puritanical, authoritarian, censorious as the Family Values Brigade of yesteryear was. And those of us who remained consistent in our principles became anti-SJWs because the SJWs were doing with social justice what the right-wing traditionalist family values types did during the Satanic Panic and the Red Scare and so on.
Yeah.
And I think things aren't going to go back to normal until the left wing remembers that it should have a libertarian and populist side too. Because I am slightly worried that the ascendancy of the right off the back of BTFOing SJWs, as they deserve to be, will ultimately end up lionizing people like Matt Walsh and Gavin McGinnis to become the family values tradcons all over again. And frankly, I would prefer if we just lopped the top half off the political spectrum entirely, and so both sides could be populist and libertarian and non-moralistic and non-elitist. But it's gonna take some conscious doing to get there, because there's such a tendency to go, well, anything's better than the SJWs. Just like back in the day, there was the push of, well, anything's better than the tradcon evangelical types. And frankly, I say we reject both of them, and then we can go back to people trusting each other and generally not giving a fuck, which is the correct response, the libertarian live and let live response.
I don't know. And
Problem
also,
is, you have idiots calling that fascist, and sadly, others will listen, but it's slowly starting to turn.
Well, and unfortunately, a lot of the people who started the anti-social justice culture war back in 2013, for the longest time they were fighting the left on the left's terms and winning. But then they got hit with the snake a few too many times and started embracing exactly what like Sargon of Akkad is it? Sargon of Akkad is a great example.
Sargon.
He
Yeah.
was the he was the internet's poster boy for classical liberalism from 2013 all the way through 2018. But because he got labeled with fascism and traditionalism and conservatism and so on, after a certain point, he broke down, gave up, and started embracing the straw man that he always fought against. And now that's probably where the next wave of moralistic authoritarianism is going to grow out of, because unfortunately, a lot of the people who were left wing at the start of Gamergate are not left wing anymore because they just gave up on they just gave up on the political territory entirely.
Yeah, and also like leads to like a conflation between like those like who are like real liberals of the classical sense.
Thoughts and
Just
we'll wrap it up.
bunch of libertarians, like with that of leftists, even though like they're not the same. Much similar to how like with us, like the millennials, like us, like the media conflating us like with the Zoomers, even though we are different like in terms of generations as well as attitude.
And most people just straight up aren't even paying attention to the Gen Alphas, even though the Gen Alphas are 13, I believe, as of this year.
Yes.
And they love the
Yeah,
DMC Netflix series.
They've been a lot of them have been getting into like Pokemon.
It's nice to see kind of Gen X and millennial like youthful irreverence in the face of authority kind of reborn in Gen Alphas.
Pokemon. Let's see. There was Pokemon. I've seen a lot of comic stuff talked about, but and Japan decided to bring out a bunch of classic literature anime, a redo of one of their older genres, which was called Anne Shirley. So
I remember
Anne Green
hearing
Gables.
about that.
Leia, you want to say something before we wrap it up? Is she still with us?
Yeah, she'll be right back. I'm not sure if she is back.
Oh, she had to go do something real quick. She's in BRB right there.
Yeah, she did
That
say
was
that.
minutes ago, though. She must.
Older designers are too hard to draw. That's why Beanmouth is BLG, because it's easy.
The cow arts.
Yeah. It's kind of a template, really. It actually is a template.
It did turn into a template. They had gotten inspiration from The Simpsons for most of it. Anne Shirley, isn't that Anne of Green Gables? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
In other words,
once upon a time,
what I can gather, sorry, Dom. What I can gather this, just go look at Ayn Rand stuff and just look up objectivism, and you'll very much be much better off than going with the herd with either side.
And actually understand that like what objectivism actually is and who Ayn Rand was as a character, and essentially don't listen to Ken Levine and Bioshock, because it mischaracterized objectivism and Ayn Rand wholesale.
Well, and let's be fair, a lot of so-called objectivists, like self-reporting objectivists, don't really understand the philosophy they're claiming to espouse. Cough, cough, Zack Snyder.
who made the shittiest Seven Samurai movie ever in history.
Well, and let's be real here. Ironically, I think his objectivism benefited him when he was remaking Watchmen because he came to the same conclusion as a lot of the readers of Watchmen came to, which is Rorschach is the good guy, no matter what Alan Moore wanted the case to be. Whereas it backfired horribly when he did Man of Steel, because Superman is probably the least Randian objectivist character it is possible to have. And so Zack Snyder felt like he needed to force Randian objectivism into a character who is all about compassion to a fault, idealism, and altruism, which are the basic antithesis of Randian objectivism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Man of Steel sucks.
In my opinion, he's trying to rewrite Watchmen through the DCEU.
Well, and in fairness, it's possible that's what Warner Brothers told him to do, because let's be real here, the comics themselves have also taken the wrong lessons from the British invasion. A lot of modern day comic writers are doing their damnedest to be the next Alan Moore or the next Neil Gaiman or the next Jamie Delano, instead of caring about things like in-universe logic, in-universe characterization, or in like established world building. And that is another vector of modern day art school mentality that we need to push back against. This idea that in-universe logic always must be second fiddle to ma themes, ma authorial intent, and of course ma non-diegetic socio-political and moral woo. I think that is probably the single most toxic gift that social justice gave to, or I guess I should say FTD, that social justice gave to art schools in general, which is this idea that if you care about in-universe logic or world building or rule of cool or any of that, you're media illiterate, quote unquote, because you don't hyperfixate on my themes.
Oh God!
Again, using that word. I do not think it. Again, using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Dom, you're really quiet.
Again, using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Yeah, he was quoting from that one scene in The Princess Bride.
Yeah.
Always an advisable practice. Any situation can be made better with a Princess Bride quote.
Yeah, because every time with these people, like when they use that phrase media literacy, when they talk about like any work of fiction, especially ones that explores a culture or showcases multiple cultures, and it's done by authors who are very capable and got here through merit, regardless of the fact that they're not like of this like demographic. Therefore, like they're called media illiterate, or they're accused of cultural appropriation, which ultimately it not only backfires on their faces, but it actually brings them more attention to his or her works.
Well, hell, let's also point out that so many people of these various diverse categories get unpersoned the moment they come out against social justice. Like, I'm gay and crippled, and I have been called internalized homophobic dozens upon dozens of times because I also have a philosophy background, and as someone with a philosophy background, I know the origins and the operating premises of social justice, and thus I can tell you that social justice is poison to everything it touches, just like everything else inherited from Hegel.
Oh man!
I just remember some of the lessons I learned from some of the people that got canceled. Like for example, when J.K. Rowling decided to dismantle her world building to please a bunch of readers who are never pleased.
Yeah. How can we or any of us have forgotten that?
Well, now for example, now when I was going to do work and setting up store things, they had like an entire butterbeer everything, butterbeer goldfish, butterbeer cookies, butterbeer the beer itself. None of that flew off the shelves.
It must also be said that a lot of the social justice set are also explicitly anti-capitalist, and so corporations trying their damnedest to pander to them was always probably going to be doomed to backfire, because when you try to please people who are anti-capitalist, surprise, surprise, they don't like engaging with capitalism. Would
No,
have guessed.
they like to engage in complaining.
Yes, they do.
It is an unfortunate thing. I was like a fly on the wall with most of the arguments, and you could hear. You don't have to hear it. You could just see the text messages go forever. Like 2-inch iPhone screen, and the thing is 6 feet long. And you imagine, and this guy's like, he's still going because he's on the toilet, he's at the computer, he's over here, and just kept going. I mean, if he were the Energizer battery, I think he'd waste more paper than battery life.
Is this a criticism or a sex fantasy?
Oh my lord!
Unfortunately, there have been sex fantasies about it. There is like a romance book of an Antifa lit chick. Not a very hot one, mind you.
Well, no, because beauty standards are haram, don't you know?
Yeah, yes. Antifa chick banging a hot conservative guy, and that was their star-crossed lovers romance.
But that implies conservatives can be human, and we must not say that because reasons. We are contractually obligated to maintain at all times that those people are the devil because we say so.
I'm gonna end it off on this. It's kind of funny how these sites tend to criticize other people for doing things that they deem are bad and unjust, and here they are doing the exact same things. I mean, hell, they sometimes I have a theory that the whole uglification thing came from them hanging around with Saudi Arabian women and taking their religion to its hardcore practice and taking the wrong lessons from them. I mean, granted, it did begin with the was it the second wave feminism, which wanted the bodies to be covered up now. Or
I mean, there's always been in feminism a desire to basically rob any potential enjoyment from men wherever possible because of the whole patriarchal oppression hypothesis that feminism operates with.
Right.
Even the first wave of feminism was mostly extremely rich, affluent women, claiming that if women didn't get quote unquote rights, that men would just continue oppressing everyone for all of history. Like there was literally a suffragette who once said that if black men get the vote before white women get the vote, then the oppression of black women under their own men will be worse than the suffering of the slave under the master's lash.
That sounds like something from Mao's playbook.
Yeah,
I want to say it was Susan B. Anthony that said that, but it might have been Anna Howard Shaw. I don't remember off the top of my head.
it sounds more like Shaw than Anthony.
Oh, we don't know what was going on through these ladies' heads at the time. They're no longer with us, unfortunately. So we cannot pick apart their brains to see what.
No, that's the maggots' job.
and the maggots have been dining too long, and that's the problem. The ideological and institutional capture of the ideology.
The worms crawling. The worms crawling up the snout. Eat the stuff between your toes. Even eat it right up your nose.
I will. I will say.
Look, can I wrap it up now?
In paper or plastic?
Whatever's smokable.
Oh, good lord!
But before we end the episode, I'll say that we need to continue the momentum of standing out to to the SJ hobos and and to remind them of the absurdities of both multiculturalism and cultural appropriation, because they do more harm than good, and we're all better actually learning about these cultures, and they should be learned and handled by others, even if they're not part of that demographic.
Who actually give a shit about the interesting aspects of those cultures and those frameworks. Because that's how we get good stories. Is if someone sees something interesting in another culture and goes, "I'm gonna use this as a basis for my story or a piece of my world building, etc."
Okay, Wolf, you're good to go.
And know this: what they're doing benefits nobody. It doesn't even benefit them in the long
No, because
term. It doesn't
go ahead.
benefit them because there is no supply and demand, and there is no return on investment on their part either. All they do is really is culturally leeching off of people, and it's not just
Well,
my. It's from American society, other establishments, other nationalities across the world. They're cultural leeches, or as we like to call them, culture vultures.
Well, and it goes back to that thing I was saying earlier. When a foundational premise of your ideology
Mm-hmm.
is anything related to merit, anything related to standards, anything related to rationales, is some sort of harmful, culturally agreed upon delusion, and we are morally obligated to deprogram it. Obviously, you're not going to be able to create anything good because you have made goodness the enemy in the qualitative sense.
With that being said, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Those Jesus Christ, 7 all of a sudden popped up. Earlier ago was 3 of y'all. Now it's 7 of you. Along with those nonsense motherfuckers that keep popping in and out. Thank you so much, our authenticator, for joining us today. This was definitely a pleasant how would you say, coming together. Let's go with that. Coming together.
What's the topic for next week?
Do you want to be on it?
I mean, I'm okay with becoming a regular co-host if you guys don't mind. It's just a matter of, obviously I'd need to know
Yeah.
what topic we're going into so as to be prepared accordingly.
A nice impression for you to come back.
Yeah, we don't mind.
That's up to Don. He's the scheduler of these.
Mhm.
But yeah,
He's
And
the
I
Sarah
still
Connor
have
to
schedule too.
his authenticator.
but anyway,
Resident snarker people.
anyways, tune in pretty soon. Next month we'll be talking about Robotech Do You Remember Love? And somewhere in some down ways in the future, we're going to talk about the 90s TV show Reboot. And many other projects along the way. I can't remember them tonight. I am tired.
Well, the caffeine is officially wearing off.
That and the sugar rush. But yeah, so keep the notification on lock. As usual, like we always say. Right. Actually, you know what? Since Tron Ares is down the road, we might as well need to talk about the 2 Tron films on a movie spotlight. That is,
And show.
Or movie discussion. What do you say, Dark?
And show.
Right, and the show.
Tron Uprising. But also we should talk about the original sequel for Tron before Tron Legacy, Tron 2.0.
We did not play that game, man.
Oh God.
You can watch walkthroughs.
It's just apparently foreboding.
It's
That and we
Wolf.
did-
He's just fed up with Dom's shtick.
You always want to have that asterisk.
Oh,
At the end of everything I have to say.
Sticks and asterisks. Jesus,
You can't. It's
we're
like what
going
Chris Tucker.
places.
What'd you say?
Oh, yeah, I'm hearing sticks and asses, so we're going places.
It's like what Chris Tucker said in his stand-up. You can stand to have let me have anything.
So you're saying he should shove it up his asterisk?
Yeah,
Anyways, fun times
doggy
ahead,
style.
everybody. Fun times ahead, everybody. Definitely, some more stuff is going to happen. In case, Jesus Christ, guys, if you guys are the praying types, pray that the rest of the year will have at least a decent smooth sailing because I've been hearing some crazy stuff on the byline of late.
Yeah, they're
But
saying Denzel's gonna die by the end of the year.
that's funny. But no, I'd rather not. I know I bring it up just now, but I'd rather not pay too much attention to it, or even you know, draw attention to it. That's not what my show is for anymore at this point. I'm pretty much done from all that stuff. You guys know my mandate. I've been trying to move on to more funner topics or fun stuff. I mean, yeah, we do the occasional snipping at the SJ hobos, as I like to call them here, authenticator.
Less misery porn, more hopefully fun gaggy
oh
stuff.
my God! Only.
But yeah,
Heck,
Yeah.
I mean, the point of the real millennials is to shine hope to people and remind them that hope is still alive, and that neither it nor optimism and idealism, they're not naive or childish.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah,
to be
they're
mocked
still
at.
erect and going strong.
so
Exactly.
with that being said, of course, we have the authenticator.
Thanks for giving me a shot, folks. I will probably be showing up here more often, assuming that Wolf doesn't get tired of my shit as well. But until then, cheers, guys.
No, you're fine, dude. You actually bring in a very scholarly aspect to the show now, which is
I told you I speak in fluent exposition, and I always have.
and I'm
And if you
not
feel he's getting too rigid, just post a bunch of spider pics. That'll soften him up.
shut up.
That just scares them off.
No, it'll only scare a wolf off.
Look, motherfuckers, don't y'all start making that a habit, or else I'll call Mappa Chain and give y'all a spanking. So,
Oh, good grief, Fireball.
the Warrior of Light, Final Fantasy Fan 12. Since you want to speak now,
Anywho, that about does it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you saw, click like and subscribe and share with your family and friends. And make sure to ring that notification bell, that way you get notified of our latest videos. Bleh. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching. This is Final Fantasy Fan 12 signing off. And remember, may the light forever shine upon us.
the Hound of the South Dominic Pal.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us in tonight's episode of The Real Millennials. Thank you, Authenticator, for being our, now our former guest star, too, soon to be regular co-host here of our show. Make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode of The Real Millennials, as well as future episodes of Movie Spotlight or Animation Spotlight.
Anime Spotlight is up next.
All right, and when are we doing manga studies again?
Manga Studies is around August.
Kaiju
during summer.
number 8. Kaiju number 8.
Yes.
With Kaiju number 8.
Nice.
And
But
returning
until
to Claymore sometime sooner than later.
Even better.
And of course your book studies of the fan fiction Dragon Ball Gine.
Well, Gine will not be the only fan work we'll be covering. There'll be more to come. But until then, this is the Hound of South Dominic Powell signing off. And remember, keep up the good fight and maintaining hope, idealism, and optimism alive in the world. Because remember, cynicism and nihilism are for losers. You all have a good night.
I decided to put the animator Martin on hold for a while. We'll talk about him some other time. I'll take care of. I'll put up another career that we'll dig into. Anyways, the humblest of ours, Humble Marty.
Hello, I am Humble Marty, and thank you for being here today.
The lovely Leia Val plus size.
Good evening, everyone. This is Leah Plus Size, your lovely lady of valor, and thank you for joining us in this very lively conversation of culture, and also welcoming our new member of our team, the Authenticator. Thank you for coming and now considering to come back. If you have any topics you would like all of us to rant about or discuss, please leave it in the comments below. I am sure Wolf will very much appreciate that. He would like to hear what all you have to say. Until then, everybody have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time.
Last but not least, the Sixth Ranger, Dark Stranger.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, good.
Make life great.
This is your Welcome at What Time. Remind you guys once again, you are the UN Spacey. Welcome to
Big smiles, everyone. You beat the bad guy.
What a lot of fun. You guys have been real swell. And there's not a one who can say this ended well. All those secrets you've been concealing, say you're happy now, once more with feeling. Now I gotta run. See you home.